Mark Critch is a well-known name and face to Canadian audiences, where he has been a mainstay of its long-running comedy series, This Hour Has 22 Minutes. The native of St. John's, Newfoundland, is the author of a memoir, Son of a Critch, that has been adapted into a series of the same name now going into its third season on the CBC. That series is a 1980s coming-of-age story of Critch's family, and in it, he plays his father, Mike. Son of a Critch has just been picked up by the CW, where it's hoping to find the same kind of breakaway success that another Canadian series, Schitt's Creek, found when it made its way across the border. I'm Michael Depp, editor of TV News Check, and this is Talking TV. Coming up, a conversation with Mark Critch about Son of a Critch. We'll be right back. The Talking TV podcast is brought to you by Futuri, which helps broadcasters create the future with cutting-edge technology. Their post-podcasting system is designed to help your newscast tap into the growing podcast space. Use Post to automatically turn your newscast into a podcast and distribute it to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more, all within minutes of airing live. Learn more about Post at futurimedia.com/post4tv. Welcome, Mark Critch, to Talking TV.
My great pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, Mark, your show is Son of a Critch. It's following on the heels of Schitt's Creek, an enormous success in the US. Why are you Canadians always trying to swear in your show titles without technically swearing?
Well, this one was a little different in that this was the title of a book first. And I never expected that this would be a television thing. I'm known in Canada for TV. So I thought I was branching out and doing something different by writing a book, which has now become more TV. So yeah, it does seem like we're making swears, but cute Canadian polite swears,
Right.
Pun things that aren't that offensive. Yeah.
Very, very polite. So you are a native of St. John's, Newfoundland, one of the harder to reach corners of Canada, and occupying its own extremely bizarre time zone that is 1.5 hours ahead of Eastern time. For those who are unfamiliar with that fact or that zone, it would seem that the half-hour difference makes for kind of lifelong off-kilteredness for Newfoundlanders. Do you find that to be the case?
It is a little different. Newfoundlanders love their unique things. Like, we used to be our own country until 1949, had our own passports and our own money and things like that. And we're known for icebergs and whales and being out in the Atlantic away, separate from the rest of Canada. So we have an outside looking in kind of an attitude, which kind of makes for good comedy, I think.
Yeah. And now Son of a Critch is an autobiographical show of your 1980s childhood there. What were the 80s like in Newfoundland?
The 80s in Newfoundland were kind of like the 60s everywhere else, I think. We were, a lot of Catholic and Protestant type stuff going on. It was we're based on the fishery, big cod fishery here. Now it's all oil, but back then, primarily it was the fishery, which collapsed in 1992. So economically, things weren't that great at this time when I was growing up. But we always got through hard times with humor. I guess it's kind of a lot of Irish people there, Irish and the English settled it. So a lot of dark humor, a lot of storytelling, big long winters. So there's a lot of people perform music. A lot of people are funny. A lot of comedians are from here. So that's one way we dealt with that, I think, and that's inbred. The ability to make people laugh and to keep each other laughing. So I think that's a lot where a lot of the story comes from.
And I suppose winter cannot be overstated, the enormity, the length, the darkness of that in Newfoundland, can it?
Absolutely not. It's, like I say, we're out in the middle of the Atlantic, and it's a place where a lot of people live in isolated communities and stuff like that. So the only way to get together and get through all that sometimes is through community, helping your neighbors. And I think Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are known for being very friendly people. There's a Broadway musical, Come From Away, about how Newfoundlanders welcomed the world during 9/11. So that's looking out for each other, which is a big sense, is a lot of sense of family here, which I think comes through in the show.
I want to come back to the place in a second, but first to the time. there seems to be this enduring TV pop culture interest in the 80s. Probably the biggest recent example of that being Stranger Things. I mean, I grew up then myself, so I have my own biases, but what is it, do you think, about that decade that keeps the pop culture hunger for it carrying on as strongly as it does?
Well, I think there's an explosion of pop culture then too, where maybe it was okay to like some cheesy things at that time. And, you know, the 80s and Reagan and must see TV and Rubik's Cubes. And it was like big neon there in your face. And you know, it was consuming things was big, you know, and, but I think everybody has nostalgia for whatever time they grew up in. And I think our show, you know, some might think it's like it's an 80s set show. But for me, when I was a kid watching the Wonder Years, it was set in the 60s, and I appreciated that. But I was the same age that Fred Savage's character was in the show. So for me, I was watching kids my age fall in love, get bullied, be anxious about going to a party, and their beer might be there and all this stuff. So it was all those things. I think you can watch it for nostalgia, people our age, but you can also watch it. Younger people, we find, are watching it for the storylines about the young people. And so we get, the great thing with our show is we're lucky in that we get a lot of multi-generational watches. We get people, families watching it at the time that it airs, old school. And the story I keep hearing is that kids, when it first came on, were saying to their parents, I like this. Hey, click play next. Like, let's watch the next one. They said, you can't. It's coming on in a week. And they're like, no, Mom, you're such an idiot. You just click play next. And so they were having these arguments in their first time kind of analog watching together as a family in a long time.
I'm glad you brought up the Wonder Years, because it does seem to be watching it that there are resonances of that show. I also felt like a little Gene Shepherd, A Christmas Story in there too.
Christmas Story, big time. I mean, that was when I remember seeing that as a kid, and it was like a light bulb went on in my head, you know, like the way of, and that same thing about talking about another time, which was my parents' time in a lot of ways. And yet you can relate to the characters in it, because every generation goes through these same things, this same, you know, quest to become somebody, and you had to go through all these trials. So I related to that the same way I relate to the Wonder Years. And I think when I was in the 80s watching the Wonder Years, the 80s are now farther away than the Wonder Years were to me in the 80s, if that makes sense. You know, it's even farther back in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So the show is actually shot in Newfoundland. Was that hard to put together? Was there a TV and film industry in place to support you, or did you have to kind of help build it?
When I was a kid, I wanted to become an actor and a comedian because of a locally shot TV show called The Wonderful Grand Band, which combined music and comedy. And yeah, there's always been a good, you know, there's always been performers here, but the TV industry really grew here. There've been lots of Canadian TV shows, like, you know, Republic of Doyle was a big show from here, being shot here. But more and more films are coming. Ben Stiller was just here shooting a feature. Peter Pan and Wendy shot here recently. People may know the film with Dame Judi Dench, The Shipping News, shot here. I was in a movie here with Brendan Gleeson recently, not that long ago, called The Grand Seduction. And so, yeah, there's always a big film industry here for the size of the place. And Newfoundlanders, I think we have a way of hitting above our weight, things like that. So yeah, it's very easy. If you say were a grip or a lighting person and you wanted to work here in Newfoundland and Labrador, you easily could have had a career working every day for the last 30 years. And more so the last 10 years, or 15 or 20 years, but definitely for the last 30.
And you just walk down the road to shoot from your house?
Yeah, like when I was a kid, everybody told me you have to go away. You have to go to the States. You have to go wherever to become an actor. And now I leave my house and I'm on set of our school set, which is an actual school in, I would say, a 5-minute walk from my door, which is something I never thought could happen. And was impossible really when I was the young Mark you see on TV now. So all my life, I was looking at that TV screen to see the show and dreaming about being on TV. And now I've remade that house to be on TV right where I live. So it's quite unique.
So quite a few meta experiences, it seems, in this. You have rebuilt your childhood home on a soundstage there, haven't you?
Yeah.
And
yeah, with a lot of things from my childhood home.
Oh.
So our house hasn't been there since like 1994, something like that. It's been gone. So I sketched it out, show them a lot of photos, things like that. And I had a lot of furniture from my parents' house kind of in my basement, some of it. So if you're watching the show, the dining room furniture is the stuff from my parents' house. The pictures around it from my family home. The layout is exactly the same. And even the radio that my family listens to in the kitchen is the radio that I listened to as a kid, that my father, who was on the radio as a newsman, I'd listen to him every morning on that same radio. So sometimes I play my father in the show. So sometimes I'm wearing like his red blazer, which was the color of his of the news station with a crest, sitting at the table, looking at the radio that he used to be on when I was a kid. And in the corner of my eye is our dining room furniture. And I'll sit and I'll think, what have you done, you madman? Surely therapy would have been cheaper than all of this. But it's really quite, it can be melancholy at times because my parents are no longer with us. But then I'll hear Benjamin laughing, the kid who plays me, with Malcolm McDowell, and they're teasing each other. And the house is kind of there again and filled with laughter again. And this kind of new family has formed, and these new connections are there. So it's the any kind of sad feelings are gone in a minute.
It sounds like a healthier kind of rebuilding of your childhood from like Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal on HBO's the dark, twisted version of that. You've got sort of a more mentally balanced version, it sounds like.
Well, funny, Nathan's a really good friend of mine. Like, we worked together on the show 22 Minutes in Canada for years. And yeah, we are kind of doing things, the same thing, but in a sweeter way. I'd never thought of that before. That's a great point. But yeah, because this way you can sometimes, you know, the skeleton, the spine of every story is true. A lot of it comes from my real life experiences. A lot of stuff is in the book. But you can err on the side of kindness and sweetness and maybe turn something ever so slightly differently the way you wish it had gone. And that's a real nice little gift to give yourself in a way sometimes, you know, to make things this time around work out a little better for everybody. It's quite nice.
And you play your own father, as you've mentioned in the show. What is that experience like?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, you grow up kind of making fun of your dad, or maybe one of the first roles anybody ever plays is their parents, kind of imitating them as a kid. And for me, I had, you know, written stories about him in the book, and I'd always done. My dad was very well known in Newfoundland because he was a radio news guy, and everybody in town did an impression of my father because he had a really distinct Newfoundland voice. But playing him is even different than writing him, because it really forces you to look at everything through his eyes, through his perspective, through his point of view, and sympathize with him a lot more than you may have done. And it certainly has drawn me closer to him, I think, than I'd ever been, because you really start to realize, oh, you know what? I see why he was like that now. Or, oh, I can understand mom and dad's relationship a bit better this way. And well, that makes sense to me now a bit more. And it causes you to reflect on him a lot more. And I think, you know, we all have issues with our parents or whatever, but certainly I think the more I thought about them, the more I've reflected on everything like that, you certainly appreciate them more and sympathize with them more, and are certainly more thankful for everything they did.
And your granddad on the show is played by
Yeah.
Malcolm McDowell. Are you sneaking in any Clockwork Orange references?
I was very tempted to like put a Clockwork Orange poster in my older brother's bedroom. But then I thought, you know what, I will take you right out of it, you know? And at one time we're going to have Malcolm Singing in the Rain was going to play or something. And then with that last, Malcolm's like, oh, like in the movie. I was like, oh, right. No, you have an iconic Singing in the Rain scene. We can't use that because it will pull people out of it. And that's the thing, you know, Malcolm is such an icon and looks so scary. And it's done so many scary roles, but he is a sweet, sentimental, loving, kind, wonderful man, a real pussycat of a guy. Now, he still got that twinkle in that eye, a bit of wickedness, but I thought Pop would be, you know, harder and crankier and whatnot. And he immediately started playing a more fun-loving and sweeter, and which more of a twinkle, which is something I didn't expect, which was exactly the right thing to do.
That's great. So you're pretty well entrenched with Canadian audiences on CBC. You're going into your third season, where this show has been among the country's top 5 comedies. You've been a longstanding cast member of the very popular This Hour Has 22 Minutes. So now you're going to be on the schedule of a very overhauled CW network in the US. What are your feelings about introducing yourself to US audiences?
Well, I think you just had to, kind of double down on the authenticity and specificity of the place, whether it's Dairy Girls or Fargo or what have you. I think American audiences will embrace things that are from a different place and a different story. And that's what people I think are looking for these days. But the thing is with Newfoundland, it's different, it's odd, it's unique. But, if you're from Boston or someplace, you're looking at that, there's a lot of similarities, and I think there's lots of people in America will be able to see, their own kind of working class family in it. And I think everybody's felt like an outsider, and everybody's kind of, even the more popular kids in school probably at times feel like an outsider, like they're living up to something that they're not really are. So I think there's lots of room there for people to, even though it's in an odd place in the middle of the Atlantic with a different time zone, they can look and I think see that there's far more similarities than there were differences. Because the way we grew up, watching the Wonder Years, that happened in the States in a different time, but I connected with the people, and I really hope that people will see a bit of themselves in Son of a Critch.
Well, it's interesting that you're sort of burrowing into the specificity of the place. Because Schitt's Creek on the other side, didn't need to be Canadian necessarily. You might, be forgiven for not knowing that it was Canadian per se. And so this show is so much about its place and time specifically. Do you have any ideal number of seasons you're looking for with Son of a Critch?
Well, we're at 3 now. I think 6 would definitely wrap it up quite nicely, because each year we're doing a different grade. So we started in grade 7. This year is grade 9. Next year we go to high school in Canada. Americans will be starting soon on season 1. But I would like to see him graduate high school and then, adios. Spoiler alert, I live. So, I mean, there's lots of adventures yet to come.
Right.
Benjamin Evan Ainsworth plays me, and he's an incredible young lad and very, very gifted. He was the voice of Pinocchio with Tom Hanks in the Disney recent version of Pinocchio they did, as well. He's shooting a film now with Bryan Cranston. He's a busy young man, but he seems quite content here and enjoying his summers in Newfoundland. So we'll hang on to him as long as we can.
Right. And so do you have kind of a bookend event, like Dairy Girls, for instance, was always kind of moving toward the Good Friday peace accord? Is there a singular event that you have in mind to kind of, that's the point at which it ends?
Not a historical one. I have a personal one, definitely. I know how I want it to end, but we will have to wait and see. But not necessarily a historical one. We're having great fun. I mean, really, with that too, though, timeline, it would match up with the cod moratorium in Newfoundland and Labrador, which was the closure of the fishery.
Right.
So that would probably be our version of that. It was, cultural.
So a dark note on which to end a very light show.
Well, I'm not a fisherman though, so it was bad. Nobody in our family fishes. So, but well, in a way, my great grandfather was a fisherman. All the Critches were fishermen up until the character of Pop that you see in the show. So in a way, it is sort of the new Newfoundland, the future of the place is diversifying and, taking a chance to follow your dreams. Growing up, I mean, my great grandfather was a fisherman who drowned. And for him, in Newfoundland and Labrador at the time, the idea that you could follow your dreams, it didn't exist. I mean, you had to eke out an existence. So, it's pretty neat that I'm able to do this thing and tell his story and their stories to a whole new country. It's so they fish for fish. I'm fishing for laughs.
Well, Son of a Critch is a very charming show. It's a very lovely show, and I mean that in the best way. Coming soon to the US in July, coming to TV screens on the CW. Mark Critch, it has been a pleasure speaking with you.
A real joy. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. You can watch and listen to past episodes of Talking TV, no matter what time zone you're in, at tvnewscheck.com, on our YouTube channel, along with an audio version on all the major podcast platforms. We're out most Fridays with a new episode. Thanks for joining on this one, and see you next time. A new episode of Talking TV is available most Fridays on tvnewscheck.com. You can also listen and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify.